Okay, so I want to start with Kim and say that the question is, what inspired you to join Disney?
Well, my story is a little bit different. I was a Disney brat from the beginning. My mom and dad were both Disney people. My dad was an animator at the studio, and my mom was, of course, also a wet Imagineer at that time, Madame Leota. And she was working in the model shop. And in 1970, they were working on Walt Disney World and trying to finish that up. And I think they needed to recruit quite a few people to work on that. And I had been trained as an artist by both of my parents from the time I could pick up a pencil. And so I decided that I would like to go work there as an intern for the summer. And that was in 1970, and I'm still there. But if you can imagine, I mean, this place, I was a little afraid to do this because I felt like I had to follow in my mom and dad's shoes, you know, and that's really difficult because you feel like you really have to prove that you deserve to work as an Imagineer because, you know, people may think you're just there because of your parents. And so I really, really worked hard. As Tony can attest, as he was there, I was very shy.
You only go to lunch with her mom.
I did, I was scared.
We used to call the model shop Daughterland because not only Kim, but Maggie Irvine Elliott, who was Dick Irvine's daughter, worked there. There were great talents like Kim, but a lot of daughters.
But this place was so amazing. I mean, talking about being inspired. The model shop was one big room at 1401 Flower, and as Marty said, even like the Sonora building, when you walked into that model room, Blaine Gibson was sitting with the sculptors in back, and Fred Jerger, and well, yeah, and Harriet and Jerger sat up in front by a sink, which is perfect because you always had to walk by them and chat with them when you were washing your brushes and such. And they had a minor bird on their desk that they actually were studying to use as, I think, part of GE, actually. So they wanted to figure out how the minor birds would talk.
As a pet.
Yeah, Joker was its name. But all of these people just sat in a big room with very little division between them and all worked together on these tables, and people wore different hats. We would feather a tiki bird one day and paint a small world doll the next. And it was just this wonderful magic shop of people and experiences. And so I knew after 1 week, this was the place for me.
So you felt it was like a family. You didn't care to be like hanging out at the beach, or you wanted to be there.
Absolutely.
I wanted to mention one person. His name was Jack Fergus. Jack was 6'6" or 6'7", big, and he always was working on the smallest model. And he said, that was this huge guy doing this little thing.
He did big hands making these tiny little models.
So Tony, tell us a little bit about your early start.
Well, I think I was exactly opposite from Kim because I grew up as a Disney geek in Orange County within bicycle riding range of the park, which of course became as many times as I could wangle $5 out of my mom, and I'd say, I'm going to play miniature golf today. And I would drive a little further. But, you know, I could say all the things I think I've said about how impressed I was beginning with the Disneyland television show, which was called Disneyland, of course, and it showed the 4 lands each week and began to develop stories that would occur within that subject of Fantasyland or Frontierland and whatnot. And so that became very, very formative to me. But I've said that a lot, and I think everyone that was part of that time, I was 7 when that TV show came on. And everyone that was part of that generation, I think, loved that show. It was probably the top #1 show in television in those early years. So it isn't like a thing that was unique to me. So I was trying to figure what is the differentiation in my case. And I started to put together, I've always had an affinity for movies and a strange assortment of movies. So I'm going to give you 4 of them that I was very, very much impressed with. And I then tried to think about this based on, you know, you talking about this the other day, and I said, maybe that is some point to why I've been pretty successful in doing what I've done. And beginning when I was 8, there was a 3.5, almost 4-hour movie called The 10 Commandments that came out. It ran for 4 weeks. In those days, that was infinity in a theater, you know. And I remember the third time that I saw it at 8, the woman behind me said, boy, this is going to be 4 hours long. I don't know if we can sit through it. I said, oh no, trust me, you'll be fine. But, and then the next one was, well, there was Davy Crockett about that same time. And then another one was Camelot, with King Arthur, and Mary Poppins, oddly enough. So I was trying to think, what do these all have that, you know, continually fascinating me? I cannot tell you how many times I've seen all 4 of those movies. And I think it was the fact that the Moses, or Davy Crockett, or Mary Poppins, or Mr. Banks, and King Arthur worked really hard to do the right thing rather than what would have been easy to accept. I remember puzzling over why didn't Moses just run the kingdom, take over the pharaohship, and then free everybody? That would have been the easy way to go. Why didn't King Arthur just free Guinevere and make everything simple and not fight with his buddy? You know, I think that's been something that's both been my asset and my liability through my whole career. I see something that I really feel is right, and I become very almost stubborn about going for it until I get it, you know? And it's something that appealed to me, and I think was at that very formative time between 7 and 12, those films occurred, and they are something that I think I've carried with me my whole life. They're sitting not in my shelf of DVDs, they're out in front where I pull them out all the time and kind of renew my sense of those are really inspirational people for me.
That's so neat. I can see how those films would inspire you through all your different projects.
Well, then there's the mentoring thing, and I think there were 2. Dr. Maxine Morlino at Cal State Long Beach. I've been floundering around, nothing really made sense. And then she encouraged me by recognizing my passion, which she didn't share, which was Disney. She learned. She came out to the park and became a convert. And to her dying day, you know, there were about 4 or 5 trips a year. Even she wrote it soaring at 100 years old, you know. So she said, I never thought I'd get to Ing Glide.
Wow.
Today.
That's neat.
Anyway, and then Claude Coates at Imagineering, who I think was unique in being a mentor that shared and let us both work together. And I remember the first day he said, why don't you just take that back to your desk and come up with an idea and then bring it back? I was petrified because nobody had ever done that before to say, see what you can think about, you know. And so that really, those 2 formulative people had a great bearing in my success.
Wow.
I think we were all a little surprised, Tony, when you said you were stubborn.
And we're all the better for it, right?
I hope so.
So Steve, were you always predestined like Tony to go into the world of parades and fireworks, or?
You know, I was an entertainment kid. I mean, I was one of those crazy kids that, you know, I saw theater for the first time and I had to be in theater. I had to do a show. And I always wanted to work at Disneyland. I knew it early on. I remember my parents taking me there. I lived out in Palm Springs, and it wasn't that far. But back then it was. To go to Disneyland was a trek from out there. And I remember walking in, and because I was that next generation going, wow. This is a dream world. It's a dream place that, I mean, I love the animatronics. I couldn't get enough of everything that they were doing at the parks. I remember having this National Geographic about Disneyland and going through a page by page by page and writing letters to Disneyland going, do you have anything else on the Country Bear Jamboree? I'd really like to learn more about this. And it was fascinating to me. And I tried to find a way to Disneyland. Like, how do you work there? And a guy that I was in a show with, actually, John Anello. And John worked in entertainment at Disneyland, and I said, I really want to work there. And like Tony, it's about the passion, and they can see this passion. And he introduced me to Claire Grant, who was in charge of entertainment art. And he goes, can you start in December? And I think it was kind of predestined a little bit. And so I started in the art department and literally had a master's class in parades. I mean, you can't go to school to learn how to design a parade. It's just its own thing. But there were masters at it at that time that we got to work with and study with. And it was so wonderful. And over time, we've got to carry on those traditions from those who started it and helped us move through time. And it's really been a blessing. It really has been.
Fantastic. And so, Kevin, you started. Tell us when you started.
Well, this is going to sound like a very unusual story, but when I was laying in my crib, I looked up on the wall, and my first memory actually was a little cardboard cutout of Casey Jr. circus train. And I noticed that one of the cars they were like in a cage, like I was, and I remember that was coming up. But ever since then, it was like, you know, like Tony, I was a North Orange County kid, and you know, raised on Disneyland records, Disneyland storybooks, Wonderful World of Disney. That was kind of the window to the world, you know. And then I got my job at Disneyland, and I was actually an art major because I wanted to be a Disney animator. I really wanted to work at the Disney Studios as an animator. That was my aspiration. And then I found out about Wet Enterprises. We're hiring people to work on Epcot. And back in the days when I worked in the dish room at the Plaza Inn, I used to set up chairs at the end of the night, you know, when the announcer would say, Disneyland has come to the end of its normal operating day. It is our sincere hope that you've enjoyed your stay at the Walt Disney Magic Kingdom and return again to visit with us. So after that announcement, I listened to the people as I was setting up the chairs and heard all their comments about the day in the park. And they were amazing. They were all exhausted, they were tired, they were happy, they were talking about their great memories. And when one day a lady went by, somebody's pushing her wheelchair, she said, this was the best day of my life. And like my friend and colleague Tom Morris often says, it was kind of a call to action. I totally changed my mind about animation and went for the job up at Wet Enterprises, even though I took a cut and pay from Disneyland actually. But it was very strange because I got to work on all the things I was interested in as a kid, like putting on, a little bit like Steve, I used to put on theater shows in my garage and, you know, Halloween haunted houses and made animated films with my dad's camera and loved movies and TV. And so in a way that was a little predestination too. All of those things I loved as a kid kind of paved the way up to the Imagineering doorstep.
So you started, what, dusting models, you said? And
yeah, when I first got a job at WED, I got the most entry-level position that you could imagine. I was sweeping floors and dusting models and putting chairs up and scared to death of Marty Sklar because he was large and in charge of Epcot. But at the time, it was such a wonderful time because the photo, Leslie, you showed up earlier, the black and white photo, many of those people were at WED when I arrived. And in this entry-level position, I never complained because people like Herb Ryman and Claude Coates and, you know, Mark Davis and Ward Kimball, they were working on Epcot projects, and they were all my heroes in Disney animation. Many of them were still there. And so doing the grunt work for them helped me to get to know them and their ways and their styles. And, you know, they kind of took me under their wing, and Randy Bright had a lot to do with that too, as Marty was mentioning earlier. So that's kind of how that happened.